Hello everyone, and welcome once again to the Heir's Lair. I am your host, Sparring Officer Jonathan Taylor. This week's video is a follow-up on last week's video, link in the iCard above, where I went into the history of the Empire from the backstory of my novel series. In this video, I'm going to go a bit into the political aspects of what made the Empire unique or noteworthy, and also explore how the republics have changed from the days of the Empire, or what characterizes them in contrast to the Empire. I'm pretty much going to divide this into various ages that are defined by the dynasties under which the Empire existed. So, and if you hear anything about, if you hear anything that is unchanged from one dynasty to the next, you can assume it stay that way into the next age. Also, I'm only going to go briefly over what happened, because I'm trying to condense about 1,000 years of history, and I won't go too much into any external politics, because again it would require way too much explanations. So just assume that the Empire exists in a semi-permeable bubble. Things that happen outside of the bubble do have an effect on what's happening within the Empire, but most of the influences on its goings-on come from within. That being said, let's get started. We're starting with the Starnic dynasty, the one that was in control of the Nordan Kingdom as it started to expand into the Nordan Empire. And their model of leadership was the anarcho-monarchy. That anarcho-monarchy is pretty much a meme theory in political discussions. Namely, it states that while there is a state which is headed by a monarch, the actual authority that state has is pretty small. There are various other forms and aspects of society that dictate its course to a much higher extent. In practice, in this particular case, this means that the the actual fiefdoms that made up the Nordan Empire were run by whatever noble whatever noble house was in charge at in the fiefdom. They did have some rules and laws to follow based on that were given by the actual Imperial dynasty, but overall these were fairly minimal. How minimal, you may ask? Well, even the taxation is an opt-in system, as in you can choose to be part of the empire but not pay taxes. However, if you don't pay taxes, you have to pay tariffs when it comes to trading with parts of the empire that do pay taxes, funnily enough. And also, you will not receive any aid if you go for any catastrophes, like, say, an agricultural blight. Also, interestingly enough, the Starnics were matrilineal, as in women were preferred when it came to inheritance over men. In many other aspects of society, at least in Nordan, in the actual Nordan homeland, the two sexes were treated pretty equitably. It was only in terms of inheritance that you have this disparity. Overall though, this didn't really reflect upon the fiefdoms, because, as I said, they were mostly autonomous, almost independent. It is only in times of war that they really had to that a more strict control could be exercised by the Imperial crown. And given the empire was almost constantly at war and constantly expanding, in practice, in practice, the system still led to a more traditional medieval empire. When the Starniks were deposed and the Bealdains took over, they decided that they would institute a more formalized feudal monarchical system. As in, you have feudal courts, and they all were made up of the reigning noble, their line of succession, as well as their retainers, each of whom have various roles within the castle or within the fiefdom of the noble. Also, taxation became mandatory again, and tax evasion was punished with sanctions. The Bealdains also instituted a service economy in order to better fulfill the needs of their subjects. A service economy means that instead of going to a carpenter and either buying a chair or telling the carpenter you want a chair, you tell the carpenter that you want to furbish your house, and said carpenter will do just that. The initial response of the nobility from the Northern Empire was negative, because not only do they have to pay taxes now, they also have to organize in a way that they didn't choose. So the first two Bealdain emperors were pretty much consistently putting down raids and rebellions. The third Bealdain emperor, Elfric, was more inviting when it came to dealing with other nobles, and had them contribute to the Imperial law. However, we all know what happened when he tried to appease them further by moving his capital. So, yeah. In long story short, it led to the Bealdains being deposed by the Brantners. The Brantners took the centralized model that the Bealdains put in place and decided to expand upon it. First thing they did was to change the way the economy was run from a service economy to a planned economy that would, in theory at least, allow the people who are most knowledgeable in terms of finance to also have a direct impact and improvement upon what would make the lives of the subjects, both commoner and noble, better. In order to appease his allies, or their allies, the Brantners also instituted and maintained a federalized empire, as in the empire was divided into various semi-autonomous provinces. They still had to follow a common core of imperial law, but there are various fields where these provinces could self-rule and self-determine, meaning they could not only decide what kind of laws they would put in place, they could also determine how those laws would be not just enforced but also developed. That is how you get the first electorates of the empire. In order to maintain cohesion, the Brantners also introduced a fostering system where the children of various families of the high nobility would be fostered with each other, and he decided to expand his military in a more meritocratic way. That means in practice that various restrictions based on that limited who could be part of the military and who could ascend to which rank within the military had been lifted. And the military, surprisingly enough, became more effective and became more expensive. This model was eventually copied by various other branches of public service. For example, the court system or the legal system. And while it was more egalitarian than what the Yaldimes did, there were still some serious disparities, because like in all systems that have a high ceiling and a low floor, just because you can go from the bottom to the top doesn't mean most people would do so, or would be or could be capable of doing so, or would be inclined to do so. So most commoners still remain commoners. After the Brantners lost their power and were supplanted by the Corondani, the first emperor of the Corondani, Constantine, saw what the Brenners did saw the failures of the Brenner regime as failures of ambition, as failures of greed, as failures of people who tried to grab more power than they could control. So his first impulse was to distribute these powers both among his allies and among those who proved themselves to be worthy of it. In order to do so, he implemented two major changes. First of all, he expanded the court system and the schooling system, which led to an early separation of church and state. Not of church and state, but of the powers within the state. While the imperial seat and various provincial nobles still had final say on what laws could be passed and how they could be applied, you started having things like parliaments, things like city councils and assemblies, as well as various judicial courts that could more directly and more quickly make decisions upon how various laws could be were to be enforced. And also they expanded, and like I said, they also had expanded the schooling system, which allowed for the average level of education to rise, thereby also making making a more general electoral system possible. So you had cities and assemblies and even full-on provincial parliaments that could be where you could elect commoners into positions of power. Not too high up into positions of power, because most parliaments still had a house of unelected lords, but they also had people of common birth or of non-noble origins could still exercise a lot of influence within general society. The second thing Constantine did was he noticed that the planned economy looked at the planned economy and decided that this should go. This is also something that should be entrusted more to the people. However, he was unclear as to how it could be done. And at the time, the philosophers and leaders of thought came up with two different systems, both of which required a market economy, so that was definitely going to stay. But otherwise, when it came to who would participate in that market economy, there was a divide between those who wanted commercial enterprises to be privately owned and controlled by a leader of the enterprise, who would then assign various responsibilities, various department heads in a way that mirrored the feudal system. and the people who wanted commercial enterprises to be cooperatively owned and controlled by the people who worked at these companies. And Constantine saw these two schools of thought, and because he feared that the rising merchant class, he feared that they could eventually become a sizable political power in and of themselves, one that could rival and destabilize the empire as a whole. He decided to put a moratorium on privately owned commercial enterprises, and therefore for a long time, I think several decades, if not at least a century, all new companies within the empire were owned cooperatively. So once again, for the people in the back who weren't exactly paying attention, we have nobility working with socialists to screw capitalists over. You could not make this shit up. Oh wait, I just did. Yeah. It's to be fair, it's not just power. It's not just power. It's not the power of the merchant class that Constantine feared. He also it is also the fact that the philosophy that motivates the model of cooperative ownership is based upon various observations and teachings that are of the central figure of the main monotheistic faith that Constantine himself, as well as many of his followers and supporters, also follow. So there is a bit of bias at play there. Over time, this system allowed for provinces to also establish their own security and emergency services, which would go on to become modern fire service, healthcare, and police, at least within a society. However, Corondanian rulers eventually became paranoid, and that led to them being deposed and replaced by the Republicans. And the main things that characterize the Republican age, so to speak, is the fact that church and state are separated. And by church, I don't just mean the monotheistic faith. I mean all faiths all faiths are treated exactly the same, and all decisions pertaining to government cannot be motivated religiously. Or they can be motivated exclusively religiously. If there also is some form of a secular motivation that doesn't contradict what is going on, that doesn't contradict or is not incompatible with the constitution at hand, then that could also be applicable. Aside from that, there is also a separation of powers within the state. So you have the legislative branch that is now exclusively made up of elected officials. So all forms of nobility and aristocracy have no role in the current Republican social model. Then there is an executive, which is partly elected, partly appointed by people who are elected. The exact models differs from former province to former province. You can have some places where the president is elected and then the president appoints various ministers. You can have various places where the president is appointed by the electorate, but is appointed by the parliament, and then the cabinet of ministers is elected, or various other stuff. And then there is also a judicial branch, which mostly operates on appointments, be they from the president of a country, be they from some other figure from the executive, be they from the actual court itself, choosing who would be their next colleague. And in some towns it is actually possible to vote for who should occupy a certain seat in certain courts. But again, these are limited cases. Mostly the judicial branch works on appointments. And as always, as republics tend to do, they also guarantee equal rights under the law for all citizens regarding free speech, regarding political participation, regarding right to a fair trial, regarding right to a dignified treatment, and so on and so forth. Regardless of whether or not said citizens belong to some sexual minority, ethnic minority, religious minority, have some strange medical condition, or any other thing. At least in theory. In practice, there are various people who are part of such minorities who can either claim that they themselves or someone they are acquainted with has been treated poorly by a figure in power in society. But these examples are still overall pretty rare. There aren't really exactly underclasses or class enclaves or class bubbles that are defined exclusively by ethnic or religious criteria in general. And yeah, that is all I had to say. Thank you very much for your attention. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, then go ahead and leave a like. If you have anything you'd like to add, the comment section is widely available. And if you want to see when the next video comes out, then you can go ahead and subscribe. Maybe also ring the bell or do whatever else YouTube will require of you. Until next time, I am Jonathan Taylor, and this has been the Heir's Lair.